Have you ever looked at a photograph from the mid-1800s and felt like something was missing? We see magnificent high-tech stone cathedrals and sprawling urban masterpieces that would take modern machines decades to build. Yet, the people in the frame are standing in mud, driving primitive wooden carts, looking like they just inherited a world they don't understand. But here is the chilling part. Where is everyone else? In thousands of archive photos of New York, Paris, and Moscow from this era, the streets are completely empty. It's as if a global population of millions simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only their giant-sized architecture and free energy spires. Today, we go beyond the mud flood and ask the most dangerous question in the Tartarian mystery. What happened to the people? Were they wiped out by a coordinated Great Reset, or were they replaced by a new, more controllable generation of humans? From the mysterious orphan trains of the 1800s to the bizarre asylum boom, we're uncovering the dark fate of a lost race. Keep your minds open, because history isn't just written by the winners, it's rewritten to hide the victims. To understand the fate of the Tartarians, we must first look at the state of the world they allegedly left behind. In the mid-19th century, the official narrative tells us that humanity was just beginning to master the steam engine and basic electricity. Yet, when we examine the daguerreotypes of that era, we see cities like San Francisco, Chicago, and St. Petersburg already fully formed. These weren't just frontier towns. They were sprawling metropolises with granite curbs, complex sewage systems, and massive neoclassical structures. But the strangest detail is the depopulation visible in the early photography. You see wide, paved boulevards in the middle of a business day, yet there isn't a single soul in sight. Mainstream historians call this the long exposure effect, the idea that people move too fast for the slow shutters to capture. But if that were true, why do we see perfectly still horses and carts? Why are the windows dark? It looks less like a busy city and more like a museum that hasn't opened yet. If a great reset occurred, the most logical question is, where did the previous occupants go? If Tartaria was as vast as the maps suggest, we are talking about hundreds of millions of people. A catastrophe of that scale, whether it was the theorized mud flood, a directed energy event, or a biological reset, would leave a void. This brings us to one of the most unsettling chapters of the 19th century, the repopulation phase. Between 1850 and 1920, history records a massive, unexplained surge in institutionalization and the mysterious movement of children. This wasn't just a local phenomenon, it was a global shift. We see the rise of the foundling hospitals and insane asylums that looked more like fortresses than hospitals. These buildings were often massive, built with the same old-world Tartarian architecture, featuring red brick, spires, and atmospheric energy collectors. The orphan trains are perhaps the most haunting piece of this puzzle. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were shipped from the east coast of the United States to the west. The official story is that these were the children of poor immigrants, but researchers ask a darker question. Were these the survivors of the previous civilization? Were these children being relocated to repopulate the empty old world cities that had been found in the West? If you were trying to restart a civilization, you would need a population that had no memory of the past, a generation of blank slates who could be taught a new history, a new language, and a new way of life. By separating children from their parents and placing them in state-run institutions, the architects of the reset could effectively delete the Tartarian heritage in a single generation. Furthermore, look at the insane asylums of the 1800s. The sheer scale of these buildings is staggering. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum or the Danvers State Hospital were massive enough to house thousands. Is it possible these weren't built for the mentally ill, but were instead used as re-education centers for the adults who survived the reset? Those who refused to accept the new narrative, those who remembered the free energy, the giants, and the true name of their empire would naturally be labeled as insane. By locking away the elders and resetting the youth, The New World Order ensured that the secrets of Tartaria would die with the witnesses. The architecture itself tells the story of this population shift. Why are the doors so high? Why are the ceilings 30 feet tall? In many Old World buildings, the original ground floors are now basements, buried under 10 to 15 feet of soil. This suggests that the people who lived in these cities before the reset were built differently. They were the giants of legend, the master builders who understood the resonance of stone and the power of the ether. When the new population, our ancestors, moved in, they found themselves living in the ruins of a civilization that was far more advanced and much larger in scale. We were the squatters in the palaces of giants. As we move forward in this investigation, we have to look at the world's fairs as more than just exhibitions. They were the grand reveals of the found cities. They were used to introduce the new population to the technology of the old world, only to destroy the evidence once the show was over. The reset wasn't just about moving dirt, it was about moving people. It was a psychological and demographic overhaul that paved the way for the world we know today. Do you think the empty streets in 19th century photos are a technical glitch, or are we looking at the aftermath of a global disappearance? Type reset in the comments if you want to see the evidence of the hidden asylums. When we transition from the empty streets to the physical beings who allegedly walked them, the mystery deepens into the realm of biological anomaly. If the architecture of the old world was built for a different population, we should expect to find skeletal evidence that matches the scale of those 20-foot doorways and massive staircases. This is where the narrative of the Tartarian population takes a sharp turn into the forbidden archives of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Across North America, Europe, and Asia, thousands of newspaper clippings from the 1800s detail the discovery of extraordinary human remains, skeletons ranging from 7 to 12 feet in height, often found within the very mounds and star fort foundations that mainstream history struggles to explain. These weren't just isolated anomalies, they were a global pattern. In 1891, the New York Times reported on scientists from the Smithsonian Institution discovering several large skeletons in Pyra, Illinois, with one measuring over 9 feet tall. Similar reports emerged from the Ohio River Valley, the caves of Nevada, and the ancient burial sites of the Caucasus Mountains. But if these remains were so common, why are they absent from our museums today? Tartarian. Researchers point to a dark age of curation, a period where the newly formed scientific institutions systematically collected these remains and moved them into private vaults. The theory suggests that the reset required the erasure of any evidence that a superior, larger race of humans preceded us. Acknowledging a race of giants would invalidate the linear timeline of Darwinian evolution, proving that humanity has actually devolved or been downsized to suit a new, resource-scarce economic system. But the evidence of a different biological blueprint isn't just about height. It's about the sophistication of their physiology. Tartaria theorists argue that these old-world humans were designed to interact with the atmospheric energy that their buildings were designed to harvest. Look closely at the antennas and finials atop 19th century buildings. In the Tartarian model, these weren't decorative, they were functional power collectors. It is proposed that the Tartarian population didn't just use electricity, they were biologically resonant with the Earth's electromagnetic field. This would explain the incredible health and longevity often attributed to mythical ancestors. When the reset occurred, this connection was severed. The mud of the mud flood may not have just been soil, but a catastrophic liquefaction that buried the energy grid, effectively grounding the population and making them easier to control. This leads us to the suspicious rise of the medical-industrial complex immediately following the mid-1800s. Before the 1850s, healthcare was largely decentralized. Suddenly, we see the emergence of massive castle-like hospitals and the aggressive standardization of medicine. Is it possible that the new human population, those relocated by orphan trains and repopulated into empty cities, was biologically different or more fragile than the Tartarians? Or, perhaps, the medical system was established to manage the biological fallout of the reset. If the atmosphere was changed, or if the free energy frequency was replaced with the chaotic frequencies of the early coal and oil era, the human body would have reacted with a wave of new diseases. The sanatoriums of the late 1800s were often placed in high-altitude areas or locations with specific old-world stone foundations. Researchers suggest these weren't just for fresh air, but were attempts to put the survivors of the old world back into resonance with the Earth's natural healing frequencies. We must also consider the re-education of the physical body. During this period, we see a strange obsession with physical posture and corrective devices. The Victorian era was famous for its rigid corsets, stiff collars, and braces. While we view this as a fashion choice, the Tartarian perspective suggests something more sinister. These devices were intended to force the new humans, who were smaller and perhaps structurally weaker, to fit into a world designed for giants. We were being physically molded to occupy a space that wasn't made for us. Even our diet was reset. The move from localized, high-vibrational gardening to industrialized grain and processed sugar coincides perfectly with the disappearance of the Tartarian Golden Age. The most haunting evidence, however, lies in the great asylums mentioned earlier. Many of these institutions were built on top of ancient ley lines or energy nodes. Records from the 1800s show that a staggering number of people were committed for religious mania or delusions of grandeur. In a world where your history has just been deleted, and you are being told that the massive granite city you live in was built by your primitive, horse and buggy driving neighbors, anyone who spoke the truth would be deemed insane. Grandeur wasn't a delusion, it was a memory. The giants who survived the initial catastrophe were likely captured and placed in these asylums, where their genetics could be studied and eventually phased out. As the 19th century drew to a close, the final remnants of the Tartarian biology were being bred out or locked away. The world was being prepared for a smaller, more compliant worker class that wouldn't ask why the ceilings were so high, or why the cathedrals sounded like they were vibrating. The reset was a full-spectrum war on the human blueprint, a transformation of the population from masters of the ether to servants of the machine. If you found a 10-foot skeleton in your backyard, would you trust the local authorities to report it? Or do you believe it would disappear like so many others? Type giant below if you think history is hiding a larger version of us. In the next segment, we will examine the grand reveal through the world's fairs and the systematic destruction of these temporary cities that were actually ancient Tartarian capitals. If we accept that a new population was being vetted and moved into empty cities, we have to address the massive logistical problem of explanation. How do you convince a generation of reset survivors and orphans that they are the creators of a world they clearly didn't build? This is where the phenomenon of the world's fairs, the international expositions, comes into play. Between 1851 and 1915, the world witnessed an explosion of temporary cities. From London's Crystal Palace to Chicago's White City, these events were massive, sprawling complexes of neoclassical architecture, featuring domes, canals, and electric lighting that far surpassed anything available to the general public at the time. The official history tells us these were built in record time, often less than 2 years, using temporary materials like plaster and wood. But when you look at the high-resolution photographs of the time, you see something else. You see stonework that looks ancient, foundations that go deep into the earth, and an atmospheric power grid that seems built into the very fabric of the structures. Tartaria theorists propose a much bolder claim. These weren't fairs at all. They were the grand opening of the found cities. The fairs were a way to introduce the new humans to the architecture and technology of the Tartarian Empire in a controlled environment. By labeling them as temporary exhibitions, the architects of the reset could explain away the advanced technology as experimental, and the magnificent buildings as temporary props. This explains the suspicious demolition phase that followed every single fair. Almost as soon as the exhibitions ended, these billion-dollar complexes were dynamited, burned, or bulldozed. Why would a society struggling with poverty and housing in the late 1800s destroy hundreds of perfectly functional, magnificent buildings? The official reason is that they were fire hazards or made of cheap material. But the ruins tell a different story. In some cases, like the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, The temporary building was so impossible to destroy that it remains standing today, proving it was made of solid, permanent stone. The demolition wasn't about safety, it was about evidence. Once the population had been introduced to the New World, and the narrative of human progress had been established, the physical proof of the previous civilization's greatness had to be removed. The World's Fairs also served as the primary re-education camps for the new population. It was here that the official history was taught through dioramas, lectures, and displays. The fairs were designed to create a sense of awe and a feeling of newness. By showcasing the wonders of the future, the organizers masked the fact that they were actually showcasing the wonders of the past. It was a psychological sleight of hand. If you see a massive electric light display in 1893, you don't ask if it was already there. You thank the inventor who supposedly just created it. This is why we see inventors like Edison and Tesla being heavily promoted during this era. They were the faces chosen to represent the recovery of Tartarian technology, rebranding ancient ether science as modern invention. But there is an even darker side to these fairs: the human exhibits. Many of these expositions featured human zoos, where people from various parts of the world were put on display in their natural habitats. While this is often cited as a shameful example of 19th century racism, Tartaria researchers see a second layer of intent. These exhibits were meant to show the new humans how primitive the rest of the world was. It reinforced the idea that the grand cities they were now occupying were the pinnacle of recent progress, rather than the inherited ruins of a fallen global empire. By displaying indigenous tribes as the ancestors of humanity, the controllers made the Tartarian architecture look even more impossible, forcing the public to credit the newly formed Western governments with its creation. Furthermore, we must look at the fire phenomenon of the late 1800s. Chicago 1871, Boston 1872, Seattle 1889, and San Francisco 1906. All of these cities experienced catastrophic fires that leveled their old world centers. Curiously, in many photographs of the aftermath, brick and stone buildings appear to have been turned to rubble, while wooden fences nearby remain standing. This suggests that these weren't normal fires, but potentially directed energy cleanups. The fires targeted the most ornate, Tartarian sections of the cities, the parts that were hardest to explain away. After the cleansing, these cities were rebuilt with a much more modern, utilitarian style, forever burying the intricate beauty of the original structures. The population during this time was in a state of constant shock. Between the massive fires, the found cities of the World's Fairs, and the rapid introduction of new technology, the average person would have been too overwhelmed to question the origins of their world. They were being fed a new identity, one rooted in industrial toil rather than atmospheric harmony. The World's Fairs were the funeral pyres of the Tartarian Empire, where the last remnants of their physical excellence were burned to make way for the age of oil and iron. The people who attended these fairs were the first generation of the modern world. They were the ones who agreed to forget. They walked through the halls of giants, marveled at the lights they didn't understand, and then watched as it was all turned to ash, believing they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. In reality, they were witnessing the final erasure of the world that came before. Comment call. Does it make sense to you that the most magnificent buildings ever created were meant to be temporary and destroyed after 6 months? Type fair in the comments if you believe these were real cities, not props. In the next part, we will explore the star forts, the geometric energy centers found on every continent, and how their true purpose was hidden under the guise of military defense. While the World's Fairs were used to re-educate the mind, the star forts were used to redefine the Earth itself. Scattered across every continent, from the Americas to the remote reaches of Russia, these massive, geometrically perfect structures are characterized by their bastions and points, forming intricate star patterns when viewed from above. The official narrative classifies these as military fortifications, designed to deflect cannon fire during the 17th and 18th centuries. But a closer look reveals a startling contradiction. Many of these forts are located in valleys, surrounded by high ground, or in areas with no strategic military value. Furthermore, the sheer mathematical precision required to construct these shapes, using millions of tons of stone and brick, surpasses the logistical capabilities of the primitive era they are attributed to. In the context of the Tartarian population, these weren't defensive bunkers, they were the power plants of the old world. The geometry of a star fort follows the principles of cymatics, the study of visible sound and vibration. When you look at the patterns created by frequencies in water or sand, they mirror the layout of these forts with haunting accuracy. Tartarian researchers argue that these structures were designed to resonate with the Earth's natural frequency, acting as massive energy transducers. They were the anchors of a global wireless power system, pulling energy from the ether and distributing it to the surrounding Tartarian cities. This is why we often find massive, ornate cathedrals and administrative buildings positioned in direct alignment with these star-shaped foundations. When the reset occurred, the function of these forts had to be hidden. If the new population realized they were standing on top of a free energy grid, the monopoly of the emerging oil and coal industries would have collapsed before it began. Therefore, the star forts were rebranded as military forts. The new history taught the survivors that their ancestors were constantly at war, needing these elaborate structures for protection. This shift in narrative was brilliant. It took a symbol of global harmony and energy and turned it into a symbol of division and conflict. By convincing the population that their past was one of violence rather than advanced science, the controllers could justify the heavy military presence and the defense spending that would define the modern era. The fate of the population living within or around these energy nodes was likely the most tragic. If these structures were active during a catastrophic event, they may have acted as lightning rods for the atmospheric surge that caused the mud flood. There is evidence of vitrification in several star fort stone that has been heated to such an extreme temperature that it turned to glass. This doesn't happen during a standard 18th century battle. It happens during a massive discharge of energy. The Tartarians who manned these stations, the engineers and frequency keepers of the old world, were likely the first to be targeted or eliminated. What remained of the star forts was repurposed. In the United States, we see many of these sites turned into historical parks, or more tellingly, prisons and asylums. Why build a prison on top of a defensive fort? From the Tartarian perspective, the answer is clear. The energy grid was still hot. These locations remained nodes of high resonance, and the controllers wanted to ensure that only those under their direct supervision inhabited them. By turning energy centers into places of suffering and confinement, the frequency of the site was lowered, effectively poisoning the well of the old world's power. As the new population moved into the 1900s, the star forts became mere curiosities, artifacts of a primitive military past. The knowledge of resonance, cymatics, and free energy was replaced with the combustion model of progress. We were taught that energy must be burned, mined, and paid for, rather than simply harvested from the air around us. The star forts stand today as silent, geometric monuments to a civilization that understood the math of the universe, a population that didn't just inhabit the Earth, but vibrated in perfect harmony with it. Have you noticed that star forts appear in almost every country, even those that supposedly had no contact with each other? Type energy if you believe these were power plants, not battlefields. In the final part of our documentary, we will look at the ultimate disappearing act, the maps, the books, and the language itself, and how the Great Reset is still happening today. The final layer of the Tartarian disappearance isn't found in the soil or the stone, but in the digital and paper archives that dictate our reality. If you want to erase a population, you don't just destroy their buildings, you destroy their data. This leads us to the most unsettling aspect of the Great Reset, the systematic editing of human memory. Throughout the late 19th century, a massive effort was undertaken to standardize history. National archives were established, encyclopedias were centralized, and the official curriculum was born. This was the moment Tartaria was moved from the maps of the world to the dustbin of myth. Consider the Great Library fires. It's a recurring theme in our history, from the Library of Alexandria to the hundreds of accidental fires in government record offices during the press. 1800s. Whenever a new administration took over a found city, the first thing to burn was the town hall. By destroying the land deeds, the birth certificates, and the local newspapers, the architects of the reset created a year zero. The new population was told they were the first to arrive, and without documents to prove otherwise, they had no choice but to believe it. This is why the Tartarian label was replaced with vague terms like the Mongols, the nomads, or simply the wilderness. They took a sophisticated, global empire and rebranded it as a collection of scattered tribes. Even our language was reset. We see the sudden death of classical education and the rise of industrial schooling. The new population was taught a language of utility, not a language of resonance. The etymology of our words was changed to hide their true origins. Architecture used to imply the arch texture of the heavens, the way the buildings woven into the fabric of the ether. Today, it's just seen as the art of building boxes. By limiting our vocabulary, the controllers limited our ability to even perceive the world the Tartarians lived in. You cannot look for free energy if the very concept has been scrubbed from your scientific dictionary. But the reset isn't just a historical event. Many researchers believe it is a cyclical process. Look at the world today. We are seeing a new push for smart cities, the digitization of all records, and the canceling of inconvenient history. Are we living through the early stages of another great reset? Just as the Tartarian population was replaced by the orphan train generation, we are seeing a shift toward a world where physical ownership and ancestral memory are being phased out in favor of a subscription-based reality. The cloud is the new Library of Alexandria, and it can be deleted with a single keystroke. The ghosts of Tartaria are still here, though. They are in the high-pitched hum of the old stone cathedrals, the impossible geometry of the star forts, and the oversized furniture found in the basements of Europe. They are in the DNA of the orphans who still feel a strange, unexplainable connection to the old world grandeur. The Tartarian population didn't just die out. They were folded into the current population, their history suppressed, and their greatness hidden in plain sight. The ultimate goal of learning about Tartaria isn't just to solve a historical puzzle. It's to reclaim our biological and spiritual inheritance. It's to realize that we are not a primitive race, slowly evolving toward a technological utopia. We are a reset race, living in the shadows of a far more advanced, far more harmonious civilization. When you stop looking at the world through the lens of the official narrative, the empty streets of the 1800s begin to speak. They tell a story of a lost family, a stolen empire, and a truth that no amount of mud can ever truly bury. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue to be the occupants of a world we don't understand, or we can begin to act like the heirs of the Tartarian legacy. The reset only works if we stay asleep. But as more people look up at the spires and wonder why, the frequency of the old world begins to rise once again. The giants are gone, but their echoes are louder than ever. The question is, are you ready to hear them? Do you feel that our current world is being reset once again, or is history finally being revealed? Type awake in the comments if you've seen the evidence with your own eyes. Thank you for joining us on this journey through secret origins. Subscribe to keep the frequency alive. Until next time. Thank you for watching this videos. Click here to check out another interesting video.